Hello, everybody. If we could take your places now, we're ready to start with this second panel session of the day on the subject of Georgia's position as a global, as a regional frontier for investment. First of all, I would like to invite onto stage someone who has served for 7 years as Vice Minister of Economy here in Georgia, and who now, as the CEO of JSC Anaklia City, is developing a critically important special economic zone alongside the deep sea port at Anaklia on Georgia's Black Sea coast. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Kheti Boჭორიშვილი. Our next panelist has worked for more than 20 years at one of the world's most famous hotel chains, Marriott International, where he is Area Vice President for Eastern Europe. Mr. Pankaj Birla. Next up, we have the CEO of Ajariskali Georgia LLC, AGL, a hydropower joint venture project which brings together India's Tata Power, Norway's Clean Energy Invest, and IFC, part of the World Bank. Mr. Prashant Joshi. Our next panelist is a partner at Ernst & Young, EY, and leads its infrastructure team for the EMEA regions. Please welcome Mr. Richard Tollis. Next, I would like to introduce a senior figure from the European Investment Bank, where she is director for countries neighboring the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Flavia Palanza. And from the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, where he is director for Caucasus, Moldova, and Belarus, Mr. Bruno Balvanera. We will go now to the vision statements from each of our panelists on the subject of Georgia's role as a regional frontier for global investments. We start with the CEO of the remarkable Anaklia city, Ms. Kheti Boჭორიშვილი.
Good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to address such a distinguished audience. I know it's last session and has been very interesting today, so I would like to use this opportunity and congratulate the organizers and the country of Georgia and the government of Georgia and the Ministry of Economy for putting such wonderful event and giving us the opportunity to present and to interact, and I think that will be a good basis for our future cooperation. I represent Anaklia City, which is a private company established by a joint venture by two very reputable companies, which is one Georgian leading investment group, TBC Holding, and a very prominent American company, Conti International. Before I will explain Anaklia itself, let me show you one slide, which I find amazing, because while we today are talking about making Georgia a regional hub and philosophy and a shortcut of Central Asia and Europe to Asia and from Europe to South, this map is from 19th century, and when heavy industrialization was taking place, and it was very important to move cargo and people themselves, also to share the information was very important, and Indo-European telecommunication lines was crucial in that time. And as you see, it's a southwest line, one of the most optimal in that time, 11,000 kilometers, which was lying down by different countries, and Georgia was among them. And not only that it went through Georgia, the branch office of Siemens was in Georgia, and Walter Siemens was dealing the rest of the countries from Georgia. So back in 19th century, Georgia already served as regional hub of businesses, and also it was one of the shortest routes from south to west, which we are talking about today, and which already we have a huge history of doing even back in 19th century. So what is Anaklia? Today, as we discussed, and many of our leaders have outlined the importance of development of the deep sea port on Black Sea coast, we are in the process of developing of hinterland. The first phase of the hinterland we estimate to be industrial, logistical park, but in the future we estimate that it to be a proper city, which will have the green economy principles and will have smart economy principles to make sure that we're going to meet all the modern tendencies which is needed in today, not only today, but in the future. We are thinking to have, as I mentioned, logistical warehouses, industrial part at the beginning, but in later stage it will encompass to be a full city which will have different services like tourism, health, educational clusters, and many other activities. And today, as I'm talking about in front of you, and we are talking about bringing the multinational companies, we assume that Anaklia will become a frontier place for international and multinational companies and corporations to use this perfect location. I have to mention that Anaklia will be fully integrated with the deep sea port and with national infrastructure through a new highway and railway link and the airport, which is only 90 kilometers away. And it will have all the best business environment and streamlined processes, which is very important for the international investors. Again, before also going into details, I would like to show you this map and show the potentials. From Anaklia, you can reach the primary and secondary markets. Primary market, which is Caucasus, and Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, which is in total 17 million population, over 102 billion of economy. I have to also mention the secondary market, which is very important, which is around all the Central Asian countries and Northeast Iran, around 147 million population, over 750 billion of economy. And this is something that you can use Anaklia for your distribution center to reach those markets quite easily. And this is something that for businesses and multinational companies, considering Georgia, it's a good platform to reach Georgia and beyond these countries. Today, the first Vice Prime Minister very detailed explained why Georgia and why you have to come to Georgia. And I'm very happy that together with this business environment that we have and the trade regimes that Georgia can reach to over 2.3 billion population, of course, and having a state-of-art infrastructure in terms of the deep sea port with the latest technology and the organized industrial zone, of course, that will be the cutting decisive moment for the international companies to use this infrastructure. I have to also mention that Anaklia at the beginning can become a distribution, assembling hub, storage, distribution centers, but later on, of course, you have to consider the manufacturing opportunities, taking into consideration the trade regimes that we have. Just to give you an example, with the new opportunity that Georgia has the free trade agreement with China, cosmetic companies, European companies who are exporting to China, they pay 10% of import duties. And from Georgia, it's zero. And there are many other opportunities in different subsectors and different areas, which I really encourage the businessmen to find out, dig it out, and work together with us to see all the potential. Again, what we are thinking at the beginning is to concentrate on light manufacturing, and this is the city that will be totally concentrated on the light manufacturing, and to make sure that it will go to our strategy to make this place very green and sustainable and very eco-city. And we'll start with fast-moved consumer goods, electronics, homes, appliances, apparel, packaging, automotive spare parts, beauty products, equipment. And later on, of course, there will be a lot of other services like education, financial, healthcare, high-tech, many, many others. And I would like also to give you one example that Panasonic has recently decided to switch their business activities from Hamburg to Georgia, and they are doing the regional distribution, not only distribution, but assembling and packaging and sorting from Georgia. So those are already successful examples that some multinational companies are already using, and but much more has to come, and we encourage you to find out more about Anaklia's city and about Georgia and to use this opportunity. Thank you very much. I try to be short.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ms. Kheti Boჭorიშვილი. If we could just pass the clicker right down the queue, down the line here of panelists. Pankaj, if you could pass it right down. We have a slight change of order in terms of panelist speakers. Mr. Bruno Balvanera is next going to give us his vision statement, his perspective of Georgia as a regional frontier for global investments. Mr. Balvanera, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and apologies for changing the timing. I have another meeting. We're running late, but thank you for accommodating us. I arrived to Georgia 4 years ago, and I had a vision of Georgia, and today this vision is materializing. I saw Georgia as a, if we can put my slides, I saw Georgia as a country, relatively small, surrounded by a difficult environment with limited natural resources. And I was thinking, which countries in the world have had this environment and have been successful? And to my mind came Estonia, particularly in the Baltics, probably the other two as well, Israel and Singapore. And this morning, Irakli Gilauri was saying the future of Georgia is become the Singapore of the future. And today, together, we are building the Georgia of the future. And what you are seeing today with such a engaging government, so good macroeconomic figures, so openness to the world is what I think is the beginning of a growth and a success story. The EBRD has been involved in the country for 25 years. As of today, we have invested close to 3 billion, probably very soon more than 3 billion, in the country. That ranks Georgia as the largest investment per capita in the EBRD region. Is about 850 euros per capita. We have done that over the last 25 years. But of course, over the last few years, we have increased our activity. Today, we have a portfolio of about 700 million. We have also some other projects. And our activity is basically divided in 4 big sectors. The first big sector is power and energy. And the reason for that is from multiple reasons. The first one is Georgia needs energy security and energy independence because of its neighborhood. And since Georgia does not have oil and gas, but as it has snow in the mountains, high mountains, and as Irakli said, they capitalize that and convert it into money, this is creating renewable, cheap energy that companies and population, of course, can benefit, but more importantly, companies and the people from Bitfury and Bitcoins, their key input is energy. And cheap energy is one of the reasons why they decided to come here. Not the only one, but it was one. So we have focused in energy, and in energy we have been working for years, first in the Nguri hydropower plant, which is a very special one because the dam is in Georgia and the powerhouse is in Abkhazia. And that has, of course, an element of geopolitics that help probably to have some understanding with the region. This is a state-owned company, but since then we have been involved in a number of small, medium, and large hydropower plants. I can name a few. I can name Paravani with a Turkish investor. I can name Acarascali with clean energy and Tata. And of course, I will name Nenskra, who was in the previous panel, the largest hydropower to be built in the modern times in the region and possibly in the world. And in which the EBRD is committing a large piece of financing as kind of a leader and we will be the first IFI to approve it. We go to the board in 1 week and with a complement of equity. It's not only that, we have also been involved in other renewable. We have started with the wind, and those of you who traveled in the country, you can see on the top of the mountain of Gori, these new power blades that are turning, and this is a small one, but this can be scaled up, and we are involved also in solar. But of course, this is not enough to produce energy. You also need to transport it to the markets, domestic markets and exports, and we have been also participating in a number of transmission lines activities. The second one, extremely important, is the banking sector. The banking sector here is very strong, very highly capitalized, very liquid, profitable. And I would say that it's remarkable for a country of this size, the two largest banks are floated in the London Stock Exchange. And with a little bit of pride, I would say that this was also thanks to DBRD, because we have been in the equity in these banks in the early days. We have helped in the transformation of the banks to bring the governance, to bring the transparency, the operations, and to bring the name of DBRD that enabled them to float them in London. But today there's another company already floated in London, and soon another one. So for a country like Georgia to achieve that is huge. We work also with other banks, although it's highly concentrated into two ones, not only in equity, but we have also given to them a number of credit lines for general users, whether it is for SMEs, whether it is for women in business, whether it is for energy efficiency, and more recently, with a huge success, our DCFTA line that is providing resources to the companies in Georgia to adopt the association agreement and the DCFTA regulations to be able not only to export to Europe, but to produce local products in accordance to the obligations that they have undertaken. So there's a huge work there. In addition to that, we were the leading institution issuing Georgian laris so that we could offer laris to our clients, because of course one of the problems of the country is that the banking sector is highly dollarized. So we are ahead of that. And looking at the future, we're looking at insurance, we're looking at leasing, and at factoring, and to diversify the financial system. The third sector is what we call manufacturing and services, is what Kheti in the previous presentation mentioned, light industry. This country does not need to have big capital investments like Germany or like Japan to produce cars. The time is over. Israel does not have that. Estonia does not have that. Singapore does not have that. But what they have is light industry and innovation. We've been heavily involved in healthcare, in pharma, in services, in retail, and more we see interest of companies to produce not very things with a high investment, but with an additional value that is coming from the people and from the technology and the innovation. The final sector that you can see in the slide is small, is infrastructure. You heard in the first panel the huge objectives that the government has in terms of roads. These are mainly financed by our brother and sister institutions like the EIB and the Asian Development Bank. They have more competitive resources. We are focusing much more in the private sector. But what is important is that we are paving the ground for the involvement of the private sector in this area. And Deputy Prime Minister Kumshishvili highlighted the importance of the PPP law, which is a law that DBRD has designed and executed for the government that is going to be approved by the government. So all in all, we have a huge activity in the country, not only in financial terms, but more importantly in policy dialogue, very rich agenda that goes from PPPs, from energy efficiency, mining, competition, and a number of many other areas. And finally, because of course money counts, last year we had a record year of 250 million euros investment in 1 year. This year we are going to exceed 320, 350, and this is without Nenskra, which on its own is going to be more than 200, that, as Mr. Seu from Nenskra said, we will be closing in early 2018. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Balvanera. And if we can pass the clicker down to Mr. Pankaj Birla from Marriott International. Apologies for the change of the running order, Mr. Birla. If you could now give us your vision of the regional frontier. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ian. And it's great to be here. For somebody who comes pretty often to Georgia, it's great to see the bright future the country holds. Again, Marriott, for those of you who know, we have been present in Georgia for a while, and the future looks brighter than ever. So if I can see my slides, please. So just to start, I just start the opening picture you can see is our Sheraton Batumi. As you can see, we've been there for a few years. And just to give you, I'm going to start with a quick little overview of what is Marriott today. Marriott today is the largest hotel company in the world. With the addition, we acquired Starwood a year ago, which is the biggest acquisition in the hotel industry. We became the largest, but we would like to be known as the world's favorite travel company. And that is our goal in Georgia, to be your favorite travel company. We employ almost 375,000 associates across all our hotels worldwide, and that number is growing. Again, Marriott is something that has a rich history. We've been in this business for over 90 years. Our founder is still the chairman of the company. And now with the addition of Starwood portfolio, we have added 12 more brands. So Marriott has 30 brands to suit every traveler need. And we are looking to introduce a few of our newer brands here in Georgia in the coming years. Just again, as I said, our goal is to be the world's favorite travel company. Marriott has presence starting with, some of you may have heard, in the luxury tier. We have got Ritz-Carlton, St. Regis, Luxury Collection, Bulgari, the W Hotels, down to Element, Town Place Suites, and Moxie, which we are getting ready to introduce in this market. Again, just a little bit in Europe. Why I say Europe? Because a big source market for our growth is Europe, and we see more and more travelers coming into Georgia from Europe. Today in Europe, we are operating 520 hotels, present over 42 countries. I am responsible for all of Eastern Europe, and we are spread across 15 countries here, starting from Prague to Novosibirsk, and from the other side, from St. Petersburg to Tel Aviv, and in between, you have the growth in Georgia. And we have 107, and our pipeline is strong, and Georgia is a strong part of that growth. Again, just to highlight Marriott in Georgia, we have 3 brands. We have Marriott, Sheraton Mechi Palace. You know, it has a rich history. All of you know it. It was the first brand in international hotel, and it's going through a major renovation, and we're looking forward to opening it into 2018, in late 2018. We have a Courtyard, and we are getting ready to, again, as we spoke about the future, we are getting ready to add 4 more brands. Moxie, which is going to open. That's the first international investment on the other side of the river, which is going to be on the Saarbrücken Square. And then we're getting ready to open a couple of autograph hotels, one in Ureki, close to Batumi. And we're getting ready to open another paragraph hotel here on Freedom Square, which is under our autograph collection. We have a Le Meridien that will open in Batumi, and we have a Courtyard that will open in Batumi. Again, our pipeline is strong. So basically, we are looking to double our growth in Georgia in the coming years. We are very excited about our growth. We love the people here, and I'm very excited to be here to see this country grow in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Birla. So next up, we have Mr. Prashant Joshi from AGL in the hydropower sector.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's a distinguished honor to be here, present in this forum, and represent my company. To begin with, I think Georgia is in a very exciting phase of its growth story. Its geographical location enables it to tap and release its potential of huge hydropower resources, which is largely untapped as of now, and linked with the European markets as well as the surrounding neighboring countries. I'm proud that our company has made a good beginning by executing a significantly sized hydropower project, and I would just like to introduce this project for the benefit of the attendees. Ajariskali, Georgia is a joint venture between Clean Energy Invest Norway, Tata Power Company India, and IFC Infra Ventures, arm of IFC, part of the World Bank Group. Both the sponsors, Tata Power and Clean Energy, have a significant experience in development and operations of hydropower projects. This project is funded by a group of multilateral institutions, EBRD, IFC, and ADB, and hence it represents a truly international character of a project implemented in Georgia. This also signifies one of the largest FDI projects implemented in Georgia. Another significant feature I would like to highlight, this project has brought together people from different nationalities, from varied cultural and linguistic backgrounds, who have coordinated successfully towards the implementation of this project. To just take you through the technical details, it comprises of 2 power plants, the 178 megawatt Shuakevi power plant, which is commissioned almost, and the 9 megawatt small Scialfa power plant, which is under commissioning currently. It comprises of a series of tunnels, dams, weirs, and power plants. The complexity of the project can be gauged by the geographical spread, as also by the mountainous region in which these projects are situated. Almost 37 kilometers of tunneling work was undertaken and completed in a record time of less than 3 years. I think this is quite a remarkable feature of this project and speaks volumes about the people who have contributed. Just to take you through to various elements of this project, this is the Scialfa Powerhouse. The civil works was completed by AG Turkey through their company in Georgia, and the electromechanical works were supplied by Alstom, which is now GE Power. The power evacuation is through a 220 kV transmission line, double circuit line built by GAC, and this will enable also in future to export this power to Turkey as well. Just to give a flavor of the various installations, this is one of the biggest dams, reservoirs, which gives us a certain peaking capacity for the project. You see this bridge, which was also part of the project and was a remarkable feature in this execution. This is the Scialfa Powerhouse, which is a small K1 powerhouse comprising of 3 units of 3 megawatts, and the equipment is supplied by CKG Czechoslovakia. In line with the philosophy of the sponsors, who have a who place tremendous value in involving the local communities, as also the intention and the compliance requirements of the international lenders who have funded this project, AGL has consistently demonstrated throughout the project huge responsibility towards environment, health, and safety. In terms of some successful pilot experiments that were done in consultation with the lenders, E&S consultants, and the experts appointed by AGL. You can see it by ensuring environmental flow through the various dams so that the riverbed continuously stays wet and enable marine life, also enabling fish pass. You can see the safety practices that have been implemented. The salient feature of this project, typically hydropower projects depend a lot on various factors they encounter because of the geographies in they located. They encounter social issues, social challenges, environmental challenges, and if you don't involve the community in it, then probably you will face more hurdles. One of the remarkable features that we implemented was a very systematic and well-planned strategy in community engagement involving all the stakeholders, including the local community leaders of surrounding villages, the local governments, periodic engagements, explaining them the project features, explaining them the features of the operation, hearing to their concerns, addressing their concerns in a very systematic way, a very strong grievance handling process, which is of course monitored by the lenders experts as well for the compliance. And this contributed a great deal towards building confidence among the local communities about the benefits of this project. In terms of corporate social responsibility, the philosophy of the sponsors has always been that whatever we do it in a sustainable way, and to that extent we focused on 3 major areas: education, community and empowerment, and infrastructure. During the peak construction phase of the project, almost 1,500 people worked on this project, more than 50% local Georgians, and during the operation phase, probably this percentage would go much higher, around 90%. In our future projects, probably based on the learnings that we have gathered in this project, we'll probably look forward to increasing this local content, which will not only develop confidence among the local communities, as well as bring more benefits to the region, but also develop local skills and capabilities to supply for future projects in this country.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joshi.
Just one last point I would like to make. Such a complex project involving social issues and environmental issues, to implement it in time and on schedule, it takes a lot. It speaks of the probably the support the government also gives. And what a refreshing change this country is, that the local governments, the central federal governments, they are so approachable. If you have issues, you please request for a meeting and they are there to listen to you, and what in possible manner they're able to solve and resolve to the extent possible. I think that's one of the remarks, and we really appreciate the support from, and no wonder, and this is probably the reason why the ease of doing business rankings rate Georgia so highly. Thank you.
That's very encouraging. Thank you so much, Mr. Joshi. Now we move to Mr. Richard Tolles from EY. Your vision, please.
Thank you, and thank you also to the host for inviting us. It's certainly an honour to be here. If I can just get my slide up, I've only got one, you'll be glad to hear. Many of you will, I'm sure, know Ernst & Young, but you may know Ernst & Young, for example, as accountants or tax advisors, this sort of thing. In fact, Ernst & Young is also one of the world's leading consulting and financial advisory services businesses with a massive global spread. In the context of infrastructure and logistics, we provide a lot of advice on right from the very beginning of a project, for example, considering feasibility, structuring a project, through things like regulation, tariff design, these kind of things, right through to financing and arranging financing. In fact, we are actually the largest arranger of private placements in the EMEA market, so we're a huge financial advisor and finance arranger as well. And of course, we also have a very broad geographic spread. We're present in all of the countries that are affected by the Silk Road, including countries like Iran and other countries that are sort of supporting the central core of the Silk Road and affected by it. And of course, we've been present in Georgia for a long time. We have a particularly strong team in Georgia, and we're involved in a lot of major projects here. And then going right the way east, we're involved in projects, for example, right up to the Khorgos Gateway on the border of Kazakhstan and China. So very broad geographic spread. And with that context, I guess I'd just like to make a few remarks about the issues in developing and delivering many of the Silk Road projects, and why I think Georgia is so important to that. So much more generally, not thinking just about Georgia, I would say that many Silk Road projects are actually quite challenging to finance. We may all here have quite a passionate belief in the potential of those projects and the potential of the region, not just in hard infrastructure, but in all the other supporting activities that go on as well. But from a financing point of view, particularly from a project financing point of view, there are challenges. One of them is that many of the projects are interlinked. So particularly in transport, this is true, and particularly in logistics, but it's true for other things as well. And from a project financing point of view, that's challenging. You need to believe that the other parts of the jigsaw puzzle will be in place when the thing that you have financed is there as well. So there are challenges from that position. Also challenges that a lot of these projects are very long life projects. The payback period on a lot of infrastructure in particular is very long. Many of the countries that are involved are not investment grade. It's actually very difficult to raise long-dated infrastructure finance for many of these projects. The market simply doesn't exist, either because there is no local financing, there is simply no liquidity in the local markets, or because international investors may have concerns, for example, about long-term currency positions, whether they're still, if they lend in dollars, if they're going to get their money back in dollars, or how that will work. So there are definitely some real challenges in financing a lot of this infrastructure, even though it is critical. And I think what's particularly interesting is much of this infrastructure has a long-term social value, and therefore actually it's a kind of a public interest investment. And that is why I've been particularly pleased to hear about the discussion about the development of public-private partnerships, because I think this is absolutely fundamental to delivering many of these long-dated, long-payback projects that are so critical. In many cases, it is difficult to get private capital to develop, certainly fully, many of the greenfield projects, the early-stage projects. The risk appetite is simply not there. And I think in these situations where there is clearly a big social payback from the projects, it's really helpful to see the involvement of people like the EBRD and other multilaterals who can take that longer-term social view. And I think in this kind of market, in the Silk Road projects, the case for that kind of investment is very clear. I think in other markets, there may be arguments about whether multilaterals are crowding out private capital. But in emerging markets like this, particularly with this sophisticated discussion about the transition from public capital to private capital over time, I think there's real potential. And I think, so I feel very excited about this. But of course, the involvement and the greater involvement and the need for public sector capital and interest in these projects also calls for a discipline on the public sector. We advise both the public sector and the private sector in structuring projects. It calls for real discipline for the public sector to think about, well, where is the value in this project for the government and for society? Many governments, I'm not suggesting Georgia at all, quite the reverse actually, but in many environments we have governments who are promoting projects because they think they're politically appealing, but actually they may not have the social value. This is why I was very pleased to hear about the importance placed on feasibility studies early on in projects. The other point that I would make is if the public sector, if government or multilaterals are investing in projects, they must be thinking about where is the public payback, where is the value to their shareholders, i.e. the taxpayer, in all of this. Some of it comes from feasibility, but some of it also must come from how is the infrastructure or the logistics centres, how are these actually going to generate value? And this is why I was certainly very interested to hear the example of the Anaklia SEZ, because I think this is a great example. If we develop infrastructure across the Silk Road, and a lot of countries are hosting that infrastructure, that's great for people who are selling goods, but where is the value for the countries that are putting the infrastructure in place? Obviously, if they tax it or if they charge revenues on it, then the competitive benefit of putting goods through that system reduces, and therefore people need to be thinking much more about where is the value add. If we think about the original Silk Road thousands of years ago, that was very much about products being developed as they flowed down the Silk Road, being added, being combined, creating a lot of different values. And I think where we see projects like the Anaklia SEZ, we see real opportunity for people to add value and to really make the Silk Road work. So I guess the themes for me are very much about public-private partnerships, the involvement and how they work together, and how do we get value out of the Silk Road.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tollis. Now, last but not least, from the European Investment Bank, we have Flavia Palanza. Your 4-minute presentation, please, on Georgia as a regional frontier for global investments.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting the EIB to this panel. Very briefly, to put the bank in the context, we are the financial arm for long-term investment of the European Union. And as such, we implement in the financial area the policies of the European Union. We do that in our member states and in the partner countries with the objective to promote growth, to promote development, and to promote economic integration, both within the EU and between the partners and the EU. The partnership with the Eastern Partnership countries are of key importance to the European Union, and this is reflected in our activities, in our presence. Over the last 10 years, we've been present in the region since 2007. Our lending volume has increased exponentially, and last year, in 2016, lending to the 6 countries totaled 1.6 billion. Within the partnership countries, the countries that have signed an association agreement with the European Union are key. And these countries are Georgia, of course, Moldova, and the Ukraine. These are countries where, which are seeking political association with the EU and specific economic integration. In Georgia, the importance of this partnership, this association with the EU, and the importance of the excellent relation that Georgia has with the EU is also reflected in what the EIB is doing. we're celebrating now our 10th anniversary of activity in Georgia as well, and our portfolio has increased tremendously. It's now at also at 1.6 billion, and in per capita term, Georgia is the largest recipient of EIB lending in the region. My colleague from the BRD explained how widely their presence and their spreading in Georgia. We are much more focused, and we are focusing on the EIB's. We are focusing on supporting the government's objectives, the government's vision of making Georgia a point of crossword between the East and Europe, and at being an economic hub for the region. And in this, we are supporting the governments in two areas: in infrastructure, notably in transport. We have invested almost 1 billion in the transport sector. And the other area is support to the private sector through directly for larger businesses or through local banks for SMEs. I think it's important to point out that we're not only supporting the private sector by providing lending, but by providing instruments that are geared specially to the ambitions to make Georgia grow as in terms of innovation, and make Georgia grow in terms of trade and competitiveness within the larger European framework. And for this we have two instruments, one which is called INNOFIN, that provides guarantees, provides advisory, and provides loans for enterprises in innovative sectors. And we have an instrument as part of the deep and comprehensive economic and trade development for to help enterprises become more competitive in commercial terms and to be able to operate in the international market. This is all for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Palanza, for that presentation. Now we're going to turn now to the question-based part of this session, where each of our panelists can address issues relating to their particular areas of interest and expertise. And I'd like to start again with you, Ms. Boჭorიშვილი, for Anaklia City. Georgia has a total of 4 free industrial zones and several free tourism zones as well. It sounds from what you were saying in your presentation like Anaklia City has a great mix of features in its setup for being a future city. What would you say would differentiate Anaklia City from the other zones? And what are the biggest challenges you face in developing your zone?
Thank you, Jan, for the question. Let me start with that yes, you're absolutely right. Georgia has 4 industrial zones, but if we also look in the world, there are hundreds of industrial zones, and you have to make sure that you have to be competitive and you have to have advantages compared to other industrial zones as well. And we have seen a lot of successful cases, and we have seen a lot of not successful cases. And of course, for us, to learn the best scenarios and to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes, but to rather capitalize on the success stories is the main task. First of all, I have to mention that Anaklia has a special economic zone status, which is defined in the Georgian constitution. And this gives us an opportunity to define totally a brand new law with the government of Georgia, which actually gives us also an opportunity to create incentives, but not only tax incentives, because I don't like, in general, tax incentives. There might be some other incentives that will bring international companies. One of those we are considering maybe bringing an English law, because this industrial zone we think that should be for the multinational companies, and they are more aware about the English law maybe than the local. But this is just an example. So we are in the process of defining, together with the government, a brand new legislation which will be further attracting the multinational companies. The second, I have to mention that in the first phase, as I mentioned, we are looking to develop the 400 hectare land, but in total we are looking to develop 2,000 hectare land. And what also the best cases show us, if you start with only industrial and logistic park, it's not enough, because when multinational companies they come, they need a proper city to live, meaning proper residentials, financial centers, business environment, healthcare cluster, educational cluster. So we envisage at the end of the day to develop all the multi-service approach and to make sure that the quality life is acceptable for the international companies. I have to also mention that our vision is to encompass and to become a green eco-city and smart city, which is a future of probably any of the cities. And we are actually taking this principle from the scratch, and we are planning to integrate this at the very beginning to make sure that we are providing the state-of-art infrastructure for the companies. We are the hinterland of the deep sea port, and that's the only deep sea port in Georgia, which of course creates additional opportunities. As you know, at this point, Georgia could only receive 1,500 TEU capacity ships, and some of the big companies are not interested to go through Georgia. It's quite small quantities, while the Anaklia deep sea port will enable to receive 10,000 TEU capacity ships, which will create a totally different opportunities. So transport forwarders, logistic companies will capitalize on that, and again, this will be a big advantage. Not only that we have deep sea port, we will be fully integrated with the national and regional infrastructure, as government of Georgia already committed to do the railway and road link, which will be integrated fully to this industrial zone. And of course, not only hard infrastructure is important here, I have to underline the soft infrastructure, because we make sure that there will be all the processes streamlined, so any double handling or any additional steps will not be required, and everything, both hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure, will be planned according to make sure that it's fast and easy to do the business in Georgia. I have to mention that, again, our main and target is to bring at the beginning the logistic warehouses, distribution hubs, and I briefly mentioned the primary, secondary markets, but I have to also mention definitely that Georgia is 8 days away from China and 4 days away to any point of the European countries. So definitely to capitalize on that, as well as to capitalize from Europe to Iran and Europe to India trade route, which is currently around 90 billion from Europe to India and around 50 billion Europe to Iran, which will double as soon as the sanctions are over. Of course, there is a lot of opportunities to consider manufacturing, assembling, and added value activities in Georgia. So I think we look at it at a very comprehensive level, and as the first phase of the port will be completed by 2021, we also aiming that the first phase of the city will be completed by that time, and already working with future tenants, future large international logistic companies, as well as big distributors and importers and exporters, as well as manufacturers, to offer them this opportunity in Georgia. Port is developed by all the reputable companies, all the feasibility studies, including environmental study, master planning, or feasibility studies have been done by the top reputable companies. So we are receiving to have a state-of-art infrastructure. Likewise, we are now in the process to develop the master plan, both in terms of the business services as well as the how we're going to plan this area by the international top company, which will give us the opportunity to phase out this project to make sure that it's going to be sustainable, but from the other side, to make sure that we have the opportunity to further develop the hinterland and to really get the incentives and multiply effects from the deep sea port and all the infrastructure which is created. Because first of all, this industrial zone and this city will be the major job creation in our country, and it will be a platform for international companies to use as a frontier place where all is organized. And one but not least, I have to mention, we today again worked and talked about the business environment, which in Georgia is excellent, but you need to provide the international companies the sufficient infrastructure. And everybody will agree that this was missing. And through this deep support and the government's involvement to capitalize and invest 3.5 billion in the infrastructure, I think we will take this challenge away, and definitely Georgia will become the place for multinational companies. Our aim is to bring big companies, so it's also a totally different approach. We are looking to bring those companies who are not in Georgia yet, and to fully offer all the services that they are seeking. So at this point, we are actively doing investment promotion. We have traveled to a number of international countries, and we already have a number of international companies in our pipeline who are ready to see the further development and to enter to our market through Anaklia City and Anaklia Deep Seaport.
Thank you so much, Kheti. It's such an extraordinary scope to that project. Now, Mr. Pankaj Birla from Marriott International, as a senior figure in one of the world's largest hotel chains, what evidence do you see of Georgia's growth as a destination for international tourism, and how can its location and business infrastructure benefit international business travelers?
Again, we heard from the minister earlier, the tourism arrivals in the country is already at 7 million, which was all of last year. So that's a very, very encouraging trend. Again, in our industry, we always look at ease of access to travel into the country, and it's very encouraging that almost 100 countries can travel into Georgia without visa, which only we can see from our source markets as we study in our hotels. And you can see that demand is continuing to come from newer markets, which we never thought before would have happened. Markets like Israel, we are seeing big growth coming from Israel. We are starting to see arrivals from China, starting to see arrivals from India. As we heard, again, combined with both the business potential Georgia has to offer, the beautiful country it is, I think the key ingredient for us and why why we've been successful and why we feel very, very positive about the future is the people of Georgia, is the hospitality the people here offer that really, really differentiates across the region we operate in. And I handle countries across Russia and CIS, and Georgia just offers a lot of potential in future. And I am extremely positive about the future. So thank you.
That famous Georgia hospitality. Thank you very much, Mr. Birla. And Mr. Prashant Joshi, you've an international perspective and lead a joint venture with partners in India and Norway. How is Georgia placed, would you say, to make use of its natural energy resources and fast-growing infrastructure to create a new regional frontier?
It's a very important question, and I would say that if prima facie, if you see all the elements that are required to propel Georgia forward, they are there. The government is supportive, the pace of reforms is very encouraging, the local population is quite honest, transparent, the culture is welcoming for private investors into the country. It has a young talent pool. Obviously, there would be some matching up required to be done for addressing various sectors. However, we need to understand the animal that energy or infrastructure projects are. They are capital intensive in nature, which means very high stakes for the investors, as also the gestation period is very long, which means there could be changing scenarios, different forces disrupting the originally envisaged concepts. And this, because of these aspects, this market disruption or market dynamics and maybe other factors, one needs to be very pragmatic when you conceptualize and plan on the long term for energy and infrastructure. If you say the major factors that impact, if you intend to take them to the logical conclusion, availability of resources, no question. Georgia is really well placed in terms of availability of natural resources and hydropower, more than 80% untapped potential. Secondly, in terms of skill sets, it has a very young talent pool, but obviously, and the Prime Minister mentioned one of the primary agendas in terms of education reform. That's very encouraging. That will help Georgia a long way in feeding this energy and infrastructure sectors with the right amount and right quantity of professionals. The second aspect is funding and bankability. I think Richard mentioned a very important point. Even in countries like Georgia or maybe other countries, project finance is a challenge. It's not as easy as it seems to be. And this is very true of energy and infrastructure as well. The thing is, because of the third factor which I'm going to mention is the market dynamics, it can change. We have a prime example here. Who would have envisaged that the Turkish market, the tariffs in Turkish market would reduce by 50% in just 1 or 2 years' time? It has an impact on existing projects in the pipeline, existing projects, operational projects, and also existing projects which are being planned. So probably the way forward is also to take a very pragmatic view as how support can be provided for projects which are in advanced stage so that they see the light of the day and start delivering benefits to the intended beneficiaries. So that's very important. To make the existing projects or the advanced projects viable is one important factor that the Georgian government has to keep in its perspective. The second aspect is the legislative framework. In terms of predictability, in terms of facilitating, see, private investors are new to a geography. They wouldn't understand the local language, local cultures, and it would benefit a lot if the Georgian government does sort of a pre-education to investors. Okay, these are the things that you need to go through, and these are the kind of supports, and maybe a single window concept to make. I'm actually very much impressed by the public registry concept here, where everything is for the locals, for the citizens, available under a single roof. I think that's a similar sort of concept. If that can be implemented for promoting investments, I think that would be a great step for the Georgian government to take forward. The last and not the least, facilitating permitting approvals leads to reducing possible delays in infrastructure projects. And each day of saved is each day earned in terms of delivering the benefits to the intended, also make the projects more viable for the investor. So it's a win-win situation for that. I think these are the major aspects that I would really like to impress on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joshi. Mr. Richard Tollis, could you give us an EY perspective on why Georgia can be a natural economic hub thanks to its strategic location?
So I was very interested to see the Siemens map from the last century earlier on. When I travel, I often see different maps of the world where the country where I'm at is in the middle of it, and that's the beauty of living on a ball, is that everybody can be in that place. I'm Australian, and I can say that Australia in the middle of the map looks very weird. But actually, Georgia is. Georgia really is an incredible geopolitical location. Georgia really can connect east and west very effectively. So I think it starts with a natural advantage. But what's, I think, even more important are the points that my co-panelists have been making just now, is the steps that the government and society have been taking to facilitate that are absolutely critical. Being in the right place is not enough. You've got to actually take advantage of it. And I think we can see signs of that. So one of the comments that was made just a second ago about the legal context, I think, is very interesting. People, investors who are required, a transit hub, a transport hub, a logistics hub is almost by definition an international thing. People need to believe in the legal environment in which they operate. But actually, it's more than that. There are plenty of environments where there is a well-defined legal code, but where it's not actually enforced effectively. I mean, we can even see that, for example, in certain parts of the EU, not necessarily always consistent. I think people believing that the law is clear and is enforceable on a transparent basis, these things are really essential. So I think many of the steps that have been taken quite recently, simplifying things, I think the establishment of free trade agreements, these sorts of things are critical. But I think it's believing in the solidity of an investment in the country. This is one of the most critical things. Infrastructure is, by definition, long life. You've got to believe, you can't walk away with it. Once you put it there, your hydro system is only good where it is, really. I suppose you could move the turbines, but it is where it is. So you have to believe that in the sustainability of the economic context for that over the long period.
Thank you, Richard. Now, finally, Ms. Flavia Palanza from the EIB, you have a special responsibility for neighbouring countries to the European Union. Could you tell us how the investment in infrastructure in Georgia can help the country grow its importance as a transit corridor?
Thank you. I think there are two prerequisites for Georgia to become a transit country between Europe and Asia, and for Georgia also to grow as an economic and financial hub for the region. One, as Mr. Troll was saying before, is the importance of a conducive business climate, and Georgia has excelled in making the country in providing a propitious environment for investment. The other is infrastructure, and in infrastructure, because we speak of transit, we speak not only but primarily of roads. Now, in Europe, we have a concept of the TENs. The TENs are the trans-European networks, and trans-European networks are roads, pipelines, energy transmissions, which are key to link countries between each other and to promote integration. Georgia, with its east-west highway, is part of what we call the extended trans-European network. And in this, the EIB is supporting the Georgian government in developing this road in two ways. First of all, to improve the transit itself, because, and we do that by investing in, we have investment for about 750 million on this road through 3 projects, to make sure that the road, the highway standards are international standards, both in terms of quality of the infrastructure itself, but in terms of road safety. Safety being of paramount importance, not only because casualties are devastating for the families, but because of the heavy negative economic impact that an unsafe infrastructure network may have in terms of delays, cost of delay, cost of lost assets, cost of wasted working hours. But in addition to making this road a key link between East and West, the development and the improvement of this road also has a very important role to play in terms of regional development, because the enhanced quality of this motorway will also make it possible to develop the region, to enhance the mobility of the population, to enhance the settlement of businesses around the area, and to promote economic growth, and to promote the development of the region and the development of the business and the development of the international business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flavia. And that now allows me now to bring this panel towards a close with some very exciting and positive news, which is that very shortly in this hotel, no less than 5 separate memoranda of understanding will be signed on exciting new investment projects, representing a great example of partnerships created and finalized actually at this forum. The first involves a subsidiary of GIG, Georgian Industrial Group, which was represented in the previous panel, Sea Power, which will be signing a contract with Dongfang Electric Corporation of China for the construction of a coal-fired thermal power plant here in Georgia. 2 memoranda of understanding will be signed by the Partnership Fund. We had David Saganalitsa from the Partnership Fund at the previous session. One will be with Sedin Engineering of China, the other with ICBC, also of China. And finally, 2 more MOUs involving the European Investment Bank. We have Flavia with us now. The first is with TBC Bank of Georgia, the other with Credo Bank, also of Georgia. And these signings will take place shortly on the 2nd level of the Biltmore Hotel here near the amphitheatre. So on that very positive note, we conclude our session. I'd like to thank all of our distinguished panelists for their outstanding contributions today. We now break for lunch. After lunch, this room will be available for ad hoc B2B meetings. Pre-arranged B2B meetings will take place on the second floor of the hotel. So thank you very much, everyone. Please enjoy the rest of the Tbilisi Belt and Road Forum. Thank you.